At the very top, though, we tend to think of culture as the big leadership message. And I think the pitfall for a lot of companies is they get that message out. The leader says, we're going to be an innovative sales culture. And then that's about as far as it goes. It shows up in the annual report. You see it in some of the big messages, but nobody really knows what to do with that. So you've got those two anchor points. You've got the leadership message, and then you've got what you're measuring for, what you're paying for. In the middle, you've got what we practice. And this is the part I think that's missing for a lot of organizations is if...
Welcome to the Pivotal Leader Podcast with Gina Trimarco, featuring lively interviews with CEOs, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who share their stories and best practices for shifting business from problems to profits. Sit back and get ready to pivot.
Hey, everybody. This is Gina Trimarco, Chief Results Officer of Pivot 10 Results, a strategy and training company that helps businesses shift from people problems to performance results. Each week on The Pivotal Leader, I feature inspirational leaders who know how to positively impact their customers, employees, and brand through culture building. On this episode of The Pivotal Leader, I interviewed Mark Donnolo, founder and managing partner of SalesGlobe, and Michelle Seger, global sales strategy and change management leader with SalesGlobe. Mark has worked with Global 1000 companies around the world for the past 25 years, focusing on sales innovation, sales strategy, sales coverage, account planning, sales compensation, and quota setting. Prior to SalesGlobe, Mark held management team positions with 3 major consulting firms. He also co-founded 2 venture-backed VoIP technology companies and a venture-backed clean coal technology company. And he's also the author of the books, The Innovative Sale, What Your CEO Needs to Know About Sales Compensation, and Essential Account Planning. Michelle, she works with leadership teams to transform their teams' organizations, improve sales productivity, and increase return on the organization's investment in sales from sales strategy to sales organization to sales compensation. She has a concentration on global harmonization for multinational organizations and implementing change within diverse organizations. Michelle has over 20 years of industry experience that includes technology, financial services, manufacturing, business services, consumer products, retail, and hospitality. Prior to SalesGlobe, Michelle held leadership positions with U.S. Bank, Accenture, Georgia Pacific, and owned an international Italian franchise. Ooh, I think I want to know a little bit about that. So let's dive into this episode and learn from Mark and Michelle. Michelle and Mark, welcome to the Pivotal Leader today.
Well, thanks, Gina. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Gina.
Awesome to have you. And I always love when I have 2 people on the podcast because it makes it so much more entertaining to have 3 of us. And we might not necessarily be able to see each other, have a conversation. Let's jump in and first just have both of you kind of do in your words, who you are and what your background is and what you bring to the table today.
All right. Well, I'll give it a go to start. I'm probably a person that has pivoted a number of times, and I would describe myself as a pivot. I'm what you might call a closet art school MBA. And what that means is that I went to art school and I was a designer undergrad, and I was a designer in New York for about 6 years, did corporate identity and branding design. And I got into the business side, and I really enjoyed the business of design and how you get a brand out there and how you market a company. And I started to get involved in the account work, and rather than going off and getting an MFA, which would have been the next step, Master in Fine Arts, I went and got an MBA and went off with some of my roommates that were going off to business school that were stockbrokers. So I did the whole business school thing. In fact, business schools back then took a certain percentage of what they called dance students, which are people that come from non-traditional backgrounds. So I was one of those dance students that got to struggle along in business school. And when I was coming out, what I discovered is that no serious company wanted to hire the art guy. Nobody could figure out where I would fit in. So I had to take the whole art thing and put it in the closet for a few years and be the business guy. And what I figured out after doing business for a while is that you actually use a lot of creative principles. You actually use a lot of problem-solving principles that draw upon my background in design. So I'm kind of a hybrid person and have combined a lot of that in terms of problem-solving and design thinking as applied to sales. And I wrote a book a couple of years ago called The Innovative Sale that describes that. So that's kind of my coming of age, is figuring out how the left brain and the right brain fit together.
Wow. I love that. That sounds very similar to my background in a way from the artistic standpoint going into business. And then Michelle, I want to hear from you, but when I have these thoughts, like I said, I improvise. I think to me, it's so important to be able to have that creative background, because I do think that creativity helps you with problem solving and designing ideas and thoughts. So that's really cool to hear. And Michelle, what about you?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. It's a similar but different story. And Mark, I'll have to talk to you about this whole dance school thing. I didn't know you knew how to dance. So we'll talk about that one later. But as far as my background, I actually started, Gina, as a language major. So I speak a few languages fluently and majored in Spanish primarily and then minored in international business. I just started doing translating for a company. And then, like Mark, decided to get my MBA, and I started down the path of traditional consulting. So I worked with Accenture, but I really enjoyed travel. I enjoyed big challenges, sometimes just too big to handle, which is probably why I'm here at SalesGlobe, because every day is a good challenge for us to solve for as we're growing the company and our business. But I actually opened up an international franchise here in the States and ran that for about 10 years, an Italian retail store. So I pivoted, I sold that business and pivoted back into consulting. We talk about being creative and we talk about being able to adapt. And that's, as we get more in our conversation, that's one of the things that we're always looking at and keen on. For myself, I like to think of myself as someone that's very adaptable as well. You asked a question about what animal we identified with, and I feel that it's a Jack Russell Terrier for me because I'm always into a little of this and a little of that and everything else. But I feel like I'm describing a darn chameleon as I'm talking to you, although less attractive. Being adaptable, I think, is what has gotten me through and survived through the different pivotal changes also in my life.
And by the way, it's okay to be multiple animals. So you can be both a Jack Russell Terrier and a chameleon.
All right. Well, I think I'll take that.
Okay. What are both your roles in the company? What do you both do?
Well, I'm a managing partner, so I founded the company several years ago. And what do I do now? Well, I've done everything along the way. What I do now is primarily development of new offers, new ideas, business development, writing, strategy, where we're going to take the business. And, we can talk about evolution of roles, of course, but I think that's one of those things that's changed significantly over the past several years is how do you start, just by yourself. And as you build the organization, you've got to change that role in a pretty major way in order to be successful.
And Michelle?
Yep. And so I'm actually the global sales strategy leader here at SalesGlobe. And so I was brought in always with the vision of being able to help Mark really grow and scale the business. So I also am their change management leader here. So I do have a practice that I focus on. Culture and people is really what I'm passionate about. And when we talk about sales and the culture and who you hire and retaining people and changing business models, change management is always key, and that's what I really love. But basically, I'm here to help scale and grow the organization, as well as also develop our offer around change management.
Well, with that, let's jump right into the culture and people piece of it. And where do you see the biggest challenges that some of your clients may have or may be coming to? Because one of the things I've learned in some of the work that we do from a training perspective, and that's kind of why we pivoted into Pivot 10, is, I would be in a sales conversation and a lot of people come to us saying, oh, we want some team building. And that used to annoy me in the beginning. And then I learned that team building was their way of explaining their pain point of, we don't know how to explain our pain point. And team building became that magical word. When I heard that word, I knew that there's usually a bigger problem. And I could, through a conversation, kind of go, all right, well, why do you think you need team building, right? And I do like the 5 whys and we drill it down. And by the end of that, I find out that there's a bigger problem. There's a culture problem. And I realized that I wanted to really help companies more with that, because until you, in my opinion, fix that foundation, it's really hard to build anything else from there. If that foundation is broken, or the leadership is broken, or they're not aware of what's going on. Could both of you, starting with Michelle, talk a little bit about the importance of culture and people, and what you have found has been, I guess, a big challenge right now for most companies?
Yeah, and actually it's prevalent almost every day in our work. So when we talk about the approach to culture, first I have to discuss for a second, step back and talk about our approach in working with our customers here at SalesGlobe. So when we're asked to come in and work on a project, one of the first things that we always would love our clients to sign up for and that we offer is that we go through and do a broad organizational survey. And what we're trying to get down to, Gina, is exactly what you're talking about. So what are the real pain points of the company? So we're typically called in by the C-suite, CFO, CEO, and sales aren't where they need to be, or the profit is eroding, or there's some other pain point within the organization. They had acquired another company or two, and they can't, there's no global reporting to support the organization. When we really, the types of questions that we ask and then the answers that we get, just about every single time, it's very eye-opening for the C-level and as well as the management, and it helps us as an organization understand, as consultants, how we need to approach the organization from the management, the leadership, all the way down to the individual contributors. So we get some information up front to inform how we can approach any change. If you were going to ask us or ask me what some of the biggest challenges we have with, culture and getting change, it would be the merging of multiple cultures, right? So then how do you actually run a global organization in multiple regions that are actually motivated by very different things? Let's give you a really stark contrast, because this was a real scenario 2 years ago when I was in Germany. We had 19 different sales leaders representing 19 different countries. And the most important thing in Russia was just show me the money, right, for the salesperson. We want to sell as much as we can. We don't even care what the comp plan looks like. We don't care if we even sell more after we sell a certain amount. Just tell me right now what I'm going to make. And contrast that to Portugal or some of the area of Spain, and it's training and development is really important to us. Yeah, our compensation is really critical and we want it to be fair, but give me the development that we need. So bringing that together is extremely challenging for our companies. And equally, if I could talk about the second biggest challenge that we face, is a changing sales model for our clients. So the biggest one we see today with the emergence of technology is companies going from selling a product, let's call it a widget, to turning that product into something that they can get recurring revenue for over time. Yeah. So now, and that's common, right? So now something that you would have hosted or you would have had independently and on your own as an organization, it would be sold to you. It's now being sold under this whole new model, and getting the organization culturally, because you sell that differently as well, getting them on board and helping them understand it is what's really key, and a terrible pain point for companies. They think there's something broken in the compensation plan when really they haven't brought their organization along to understand how they need to survive and what they need to do in this new selling environment, that pivot that we were just talking about.
Mark, any thoughts on that?
Yes, I think culture tends to be probably at the heart of a lot of the work that we do, meaning not that we do culture work, but it's driving the change, or it's going to be something that has to happen in order for that change to be successful. I was asking a number of executives a few years ago, what is culture? And one of them had this great answer. He said, it's what you measure. And I thought, okay, well, that's one piece of it. So what we find is it usually has 3 anchor points to it. It's what you measure and what you reward people for. So if you said, for example, got clients that are trying to move maybe to more of a consultative selling environment or more of a sales culture. If you're measuring and rewarding the success of developing good consultative solutions, and you're not punishing people taking chances and failing, that's a good thing, right? So you want to encourage that. So what you measure and also what you pay for. At the very top, though, we tend to think of culture as the big leadership message. And I think the pitfall for a lot of companies is they get that message out. The leader says, we're going to be an innovative sales culture. And then that's about as far as it goes. It shows up in the annual report. You see it in some of the big messages, but nobody really knows what to do with that. So you've got those two anchor points. You've got the leadership message, and then you've got what you're measuring for, what you're paying for. In the middle, you've got what we practice. And this is the part I think that's missing for a lot of organizations, is if I want a consultative selling environment, I've got to talk about the big message from leadership. I've got to reward people for taking chances and not penalize them for that. But in the middle, I've got to demonstrate and show the practice of consultative selling. So if Michelle and I are working together in a sales organization, and she's a great consultative seller, and I tend to be the person who tends to be more transactional. I go for the standard products and the way we've always done it before. If I see Michelle being successful at practicing that cultural change, then I can go, wow, she's doing well. She closed that big deal, or she, got that great compensation check. Maybe I should learn what she's doing, because I think I can do that as well. So we have to see that culture demonstrated in order to make that change. And then another executive said to me just recently, he said, wait, there's another point in culture, or cultural change, which is courage. And he said, you have to be able to push through on this kind of change as well. So it's one thing to have these three areas working, but you're going to get resistance in the organization a lot of times from the people that have, done it the way we've always done it. They're going to resist. You have to have the courage to push through, and you've got to know what you're willing to expend in terms of cost to do that. And when I say cost, it's not financial cost, but it's sometimes organizational cost. So if you have keepers of the old culture, are we willing to move them out of the organization in order to get to the culture that we want, even if they're high performers, or, they do some things that protect them. We always say that revenue doesn't forgive all sins, right? So it's just because you sell a lot doesn't mean you can be anti-culture. So you've got to look at, those are 4 points that I think are pretty useful to look at.
And what do you do in a situation, Michelle said you're usually getting the call from the CFO or the CEO. They recognize that they need some help, and I think that's where it begins. Then there's the organizations that aren't quite recognizing that yet. That's another topic. But they realize that they need some help, and it turns out that CEO who contacted you might be a big problem in the organization that you discover through that survey process. What's your approach with that?
Well, I think you got to look at who's driving the cultural change. So there could be some irony there that it's the CEO that says, hey, we need to make a cultural change. And then you find out, in fact, that CEO is the problem. I think one of the questions is going to be who defines what the culture needs to be. If the CEO is saying, let's take that example I used before, if the CEO is saying, we want to be a more innovative culture, a more creative culture, yet the CEO is shutting down anything that has to do with new ideas, I think, there's an intervention. I think the CEO is probably opening the door for an intervention to say, okay, this is what's important to you. Here's what the organization is actually saying about why we're having trouble doing this, because leadership is not making that a priority. In fact, we're hearing that you sometimes may be doing that as well. So I think you've got to find out, is the CEO in this case open to coaching? Is that person coachable and receptive, right? If you've got a non-receptive CEO that's trying to move toward a culture of innovation, that's kind of a little bit of an oxymoron. So you may not actually run into that, right? But I think you've got to be honest. And we always go back to the question of who's really our client. You've always got to remember where that North Star is. So if the CEO is bringing you in to do something like that, you've got to remember, okay, that's the point of truth. We've got to be honest and truthful about what we're really seeing, and we've got to do our best to fulfill whatever that objective is. So if that objective means going back to the CEO and saying, there may be an issue with you, I think that's incumbent on us to do that.
Yep, and we actually have been in situations, Mark, where that has happened. And you know what? Good leaders are very receptive. And even if it's, well, so what, I don't think we've actually had that situation occur. But we have had situations occur, Gina, where, if nothing is done and situations really don't change, I mean, we go on and deliver on our project, but we've also been in situations where leadership has changed after we are long gone, and it doesn't surprise us. Many times we have to give that message, and Mark is right. What we do is we try to build up front. We make sure that there's a senior advisor, if you will, from our firm that works closely with that C-level, so that when those sensitive things do come up, we're prepared to handle it, and that's the approach that we choose to take.
Yeah, and there's always change, like you're pointing out, Michelle, that very often the leadership doesn't change just after we're gone, but it changes while we're there.
We
had an insurance company we're working with recently in the northeastern U.S., and they had a few changes in the president of the company, the CEO of the company, and our anchor point was actually the CFO of the company who brought us in, but helped us navigate those changes so that we were able to stay in and help them through that. So I think that's, every time you work with a company, it's like a play, right? So the stage is set at the beginning, and then the drama starts to unfold. and for us, it's rarely just work through the project, but it's like, oh, okay, Joe is now, pursuing other opportunities and wants to spend more time with his family. Oh, there's going to be a new CEO. We see this happen over and over again.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Wow.
The key is for us to be adaptable.
Right. Chameleons.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Back to the chameleons.
With an identity.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about the recruiting process of finding top talent, especially sales talent. I was on a podcast earlier today, and this came up, and I know that you've talked, Mark, a lot on sales compensation, and this came up in our last podcast of the challenge of finding top talent and what compensation plan route to take. So could you both kind of touch on how to attract and retain the top talent, especially in the area of sales?
So I actually was just having a conversation about this, just a couple of hours ago with a senior leader. And we are in the midst of executing on this with another company right now. So when we talk about attracting and retaining the right people, let's talk about attracting first, right? Going after the right people and making sure that you make the right selection. So it's not just about attracting the top seller out there. What we ask them to do is really look at the right fit. So what is it that companies want to be focused on? One of the pain points when we talk about attracting and retaining the right people, it's the churn of their sales organization. And the first way that you can stem that churn is to hire right to begin with. We also know that the most expensive employee is the one that you lose, the most expensive salesperson. So it's going to cost you twice as much to lose someone in that first year, or whatever that ramp-up period is, than if you were able to hire right and keep that person, and you start to get that ROI from that individual, right? So one of the things that we recommend is that during the hiring process, that it's a lot more than just a job description, Gina, but we want people to look at the role profile and the attributes that we're looking at, that they're looking at in their new hires. And we choose to look at that across a few different dimensions. And one would be, pretty practical, their qualitative and quantitative abilities. So when I think about that, it's, let's talk about verbal capabilities. So if I am, someone that's selling to the C-suite, and it's a very consultative sale, a long sales cycle, probably the verbal capabilities and the ability to communicate at this level is going to be very different than, someone that you might hire to sell a very transactional product and service through an inside sales organization that, heck, might even be based off of internet sales. So we ask you to think about, that would be qualitative, and then quantitative, that would again be some of the reasoning skills and mathematical type of skills. So using that same example, your consultative seller might be responsible for being able to determine the price of the products and services that will be offered and blend those and mix those differently. Well, that's a very different skill set than someone that they might not need to do that. It's not required for the job, but certainly it's a very different type of person. Finally, we ask you to think about the attributes of that person. So do you need someone that's very decisive or not? A series of questions like that. And how companies get to that is we recommend that they run their top sellers. So the top sellers, think about the 90th percentile or the top 10% of your organization, run them through a standard talent assessment. There's many that are available out there. Clearly, SalesGlobe has one that we utilize for our clients, but it's kind of a first step. And what you do is you utilize that as the standard for your hiring tool. So that doesn't mean that every person you hire is going to be the top 10% or the 90th percentile, but it is a best practice, and we recommend that that's what you target at the very beginning. So if mediocrity or just the person that can meet your targets is what you're after, chances are you'll get something lower than that. This kind of helps you hedge that bet. Taking the top 10% of your company through that, and then looking at what their performance results have been. Those are a couple of things that you can use when you're looking at new hires. So the new hire would be taken through that process, and then you want to make sure that you confirm and affirm what it is they're telling you about their capabilities, their abilities, and their accomplishments. And that shouldn't be too hard to do, but so many times we hire based off of a recommendation or someone that may have worked with someone somewhere else. But really taking them through this process, you're not only going to get the right person, but the right fit. So the right fit is just as important as someone that can get you the results that Mark was talking about earlier. There might be a really great seller out there who can kick it in the can, but if they don't fit into your culture, in the end, it's not going to work for any of you, and chances are that person would end up leaving.
Yeah, and you make the point about defining the role and then looking for somebody that fits that role. I think too often we find people that we like and we say, hey, I think they could do the job. You mentioned 90th percentile performer, Michelle, that's the benchmark we look at, like a top 10% performer. I think there are a couple of questions you have to ask yourself. Do you want to hire A players, or do you want to hire B or C players? Most organizations want to hire A players. Are you comfortable or are you afraid of hiring A players? Do you think you're an A player? And are you comfortable with that? So as soon as we start hiring down and we start hiring people that are going to make us comfortable with our own position, then we're prone to a pitfall there. I heard this great saying the other day. If you're looking for A players, what you want to do is you want to find people that have a 90% probability of being a 90th percentile performer. So it's a double cut. It's not just, here's somebody that I think would do well in the job, 50th percentile. No, here's somebody I think that could be a 90th percentile performer, maybe. No, it's here's somebody that I think has a 90% chance of being a 90th percentile performer. So that's a pretty high bar. Yeah. Then when you're looking for people, don't go out and look for people that happen to be out there looking for jobs. What you want to do is you want to cultivate relationships over time. So we should be looking for people all the time, even before we have those openings. So when we have those openings, those people are then coming to fruition, and some of those people will be available. So you want to find people who are actually in jobs and who are successful that you can take out of those jobs, rather than people that just happen to be available, because you have to ask the question, why are they available? Right. So I think that's a problem. On the compensation side, for the job, you're going to have different structures for compensation plans. And we look at things like the pay mix, which is basically how much pay is going to be at risk. So is it a 50-50 plan where 50% of their pay is base salary, 50% is incentive, or is it a 70-30? So you get 70% base, 30% incentive at target. So a 50-50, talking about animals, 50-50 in our canine model would be more of a Doberman. 70-30 would be more of a retriever, right? So a retriever would be somebody who's working with the account, maybe doing current account management. Doberman would be somebody that's going out and doing the hunting. So we've got a lot of different facets of our canine model. Mm-hmm. But that pay mix is one of the biggest determinants of behaviors. How much pay do I have at risk? And then the corresponding component to that pay at risk is the upside potential. So, you mentioned Michelle, the 90th percentile. That's the money that your top performers are going to earn. And that's usually 2 times or 3 times target incentive. So you want people that are going to be motivated by earning that 90th percentile pay for whatever measures we put in the plan. So you don't want people that are going to be adverse to risk unless it's, more of a customer service type role. You want people who are going to enjoy the risk and are going to want that challenge because they know that they're going to be successful.
Mm-hmm. And what about, you talked about the 50-50 and the 70-30. Can you talk a little bit about the differences between the two and what motivates someone more? And I know you explained the difference from a canine perspective. Mm-hmm. Can you expand on that more of which one you think is more successful, if at all?
Okay, so everything flows from the sales strategy. Right, so everything flows from where you want to go. In fact, we break the sales strategy down into what we call C-level goals. So it's your 5 basic priorities as a company. So those would be financial priorities, priorities around certain customer types, priorities around certain offers or products, priorities around how we want the organization to be developed, and priorities around talent. So if you know what those priorities are, that's going to flow down into what kind of roles do I need to execute upon that. So if you said in your customer priorities, well, we need to grow through a lot of new customer acquisition, or perhaps we have new products that we want to introduce, you're probably not going to hire a lot of the retrievers. You'll probably have a base of retrievers to manage the current base of business, but you're going to probably need a mix of Dobermans in there as well. Mm-hmm. And we think of these as different DNA pools. The reason we don't use the hunter-farmer model is, number one, it's too low resolution. It's too it's not granular enough. So you can be a hunter or you can be a farmer. Maybe the hunter gets tired one day and he comes back and he turns into a farmer, or maybe he's a rancher, right? But you don't have a lot of different types, and they're adaptable. Mm-hmm. But canines are inherently different DNA pools, and salespeople are like that as well. It's really hard to take a retriever and turn that person into a Doberman. So number one, find out the kind of role you need given your sales strategy, then the plan falls out from that. If you give a Doberman a retriever plan, a 70-30 or an 80-20 plan, then you're going to get kind of a fat Doberman, right? So that Doberman's not going to go out and hunt. That Doberman's going to be too comfortable, and they're going to start kind of like, trying to chew their collar off or something. They're going to get frustrated. So you want to have that pay mix, because that's the biggest determinant of behavior. You want to have that pay mix aligned with that type of role. So a Doberman enjoys having the pay at risk. Why? Because it gets them up in the morning. They pursue what they love to pursue, which is the deal. Dobermans love to win the deal, and it's got great upside. So if I can earn 2 to 3 times my target incentive and the plan's uncapped, I'm motivated. If I do that kind of thing, if I put a Doberman plan onto a retriever, I'm going to have a retriever that it's either frustrated or they're pushing too hard with accounts. So they may be working a major account and they're on a 50-50 plan and they're pushing too hard to close deals. And what they're doing is they're stripping the relationship because they're exhibiting sales behaviors that aren't consistent with the role that we want. Mm-hmm. In a retriever role, we want a role that's collaborative, right? So a 70-30 mix is, okay, I'm pretty comfortable, but I've got some good amount of incentive out there to get, right? So that's a big driver. So you got to have it cascade down from the strategy.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, what Mark is saying is that no role is more important than the other. We're aligning the role to the revenue, the type of revenue, and the strategy of the company. So make sure that you align your people properly to that.
And a lot of that would also be impacted, I'm guessing, based on the product or service that the company is selling as well, whether or not it's a Doberman or a retriever, right? It's different industries are going to require different types of sales personalities.
Right. Think about if I'm selling copiers, I might need somebody who's more of a Doberman, more of a fast cycle seller. Mm-hmm. Even if I'm selling copier systems, I might need more of a Doberman. if I am selling, change management consulting and I work for a large consulting firm, I probably don't want a Doberman. I probably want somebody that's a little bit more of a retriever and somebody who's going to be more consultative and is going to spend time with the client. It's going to help them think through. So, two different types of offers, obviously. Even within a company, though, you're going to have different flavors depending on the nature of the sale and even the nature of the offer in that company.
On this previous podcast today, we got into a long conversation about the personality of a timeshare salesperson, because I'm in a timeshare capital, and how different that is, and how different that style of selling is, and how they have to close the deal that day with the lead that they're given. And they play a lot on emotions, but so that's a completely different type of sales personality that can be under that pressure to make it happen that day.
That's right. And so that goes back to that whole talent assessment piece. Those are the types of behaviors that you want to make sure you understand up front. You need to understand what you need for the role. You're basically creating a role profile, if you will. And then when you're hiring, you want to hire to that, because it's very easy to make a big mistake, right? And you're setting the person up for failure as well as the company.
Right. Yeah, I think your timeshare person may be more of a hunting dog, maybe something smaller like a beagle, travels in packs, very persistent and tenacious. Selling timeshares is tough because you get a lot of people hanging up on you, so they got to be able to take some hits, right?
Very resilient.
We're always thinking about what kind of breed somebody would be.
We are.
Many.
We do this all the time, by the way, when we're on site. That's a SalesGlobe secret.
That's awesome. I want to shift over to talking a little bit about your book, The Innovative Sales, because you touched on some of the creativity, because I was really curious about that title. That title got my attention. I'd like to spend a little time talking around that, and what's that all about?
Well, it is what I call a left-brainer's approach to right-brain thinking. So it's a book about problem solving for business, and also more specifically problem solving for sales. And the whole premise is that we will often go through the behaviors of doing what we've done before. So if we find a new opportunity as a salesperson, we'll go, okay, well, what's the last proposal that I did that was similar to this? And can I start with that as a foundation and do some cut and paste with the new client's name? And so it's easier for us to do that, right? We don't want to we don't want to over-exercise our prefrontal lobe of our brain, because that's tiring, right? So we kind of do the same things we've done before. The innovative sale is about, okay, how do I move off of that, and how do I start to think differently? And it really starts with the client or customer issue or problem that you hear. So the first thing we do when we hear a customer problem is we translate that in our minds, and we go, okay, they're talking about having a problem with sales strategy. I know what sales strategy means. Okay, so I'm going to give them a proposal on how to help them with their sales strategy. Instead of saying, well, let's talk about what do you mean by sales strategy? Well, they may have a totally different understanding or meaning of sales strategy than I do. So first of all, I need to understand the customer. Second thing I need to do is I need to redefine the problem. Okay, and that's the first differentiating point in sales innovation, is to say, I'm not going to take the customer's problem at face value. I'm going to look at what they're saying to me and what might be behind that problem in terms of root causes. So we do some root cause analysis, and we redefine the problem. So we'll look for key components of what they're trying to solve for, and we may find out they're trying to actually solve for something else. So we worked with a client that was in the printing business a while back, and they were getting some questions from one of their major customers. It was a large financial services company, and they needed to lower the cost of their printing and lower the cost of their paper. So first thing you might do is go back and say, well, if you buy in bulk, we can actually lower the cost of the paper, and et cetera, et cetera. What they found when they probed It wasn't about cutting the cost of the paper. It was about coming up with a better return on their marketing collateral that this company was printing for them. And what they were missing is they were missing a really competent marketing department. So in the end, what they figured out was if we can provide better marketing support to the client, it's not about cutting the costs, it's getting them a better return. So you're redefining the problem, you're doing divergent thinking, combining ideas, combining parallels, so you can take parts of your problem statement and combine those together and come up with new ideas. So there are some methodical ways in the book that you can take and develop new ideas that you may not have developed before without these methods.
That sounds really cool.
Well, it's, I think, fascinating in that people, when they learn it, the first step is, wow, this is really showing me some new things, but it's kind of hard to do. And we use the analogy of a golf swing, right? It's like, okay, we just changed your grip, we changed your stance, we changed how you're going to hit the ball, and the ball actually goes straighter and longer now. And so what we have to do is we have to build your creative muscle memory. So it's one thing to hear and learn the techniques, is another thing to practice them and put them into muscle memory. So what we want to do ultimately with a client is get it so that it's second nature for them to do these things.
Right. And, that actually really goes hand in hand with what we talk about from an improv perspective, that the training that we do using improv exercises is about exercising your brain. And it is about the practice of improvising. And when people say, what do you mean you practice it? Well, you've already talked about this. It's a brain muscle. It's a muscle. So you have to exercise it. So if you want to be a better listener, you have to practice it. And if you want to be better in the moment, thinking quick on your feet, you have to practice it. It's not just going to come to you. And if we stop using it, that's when we start to get bad at it. You have to really be intentional. We were joking around about eye contact earlier. You have to be really intentional. I know I personally, typically if I'm having a conversation with someone, I need to be making eye contact with them because I'm easily distracted. And I know that that's my weakness, that I need to be in constant eye contact. When I podcast, we could do this on video. There's a video component, but that actually just the video piece of it distracts me so much because I'm so conscientious about making eye contact that I can't focus on the other aspects of what needs to happen in a podcast production. So I'm like, all right, that's
right.
So when people are like, no video, I'm like, no, I will mess this whole podcast.
And where is the eye? Is the eye the little camera, or is the eye actually the screen? So you keep looking back and forth with the wrong eye. Yeah.
Right.
That's true. I do that too.
Yeah. Exactly.
Gina, I'm right there with you.
So it's but what I like about the podcasting is that podcasting without video forces me into active listening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because I actually will retain more in looking at you. But if I can't see you, then I really force myself into the listen without distraction. Everything else has to be put away. I can't have anything else in front of me. But it's a practice, right? And we can use improv exercises to practice all of those different things. And then tying back to what you were saying with, what is the real problem and the root cause, going back to what I was saying earlier about team building, I used to cringe at the word. I mean, for the longest time, I was so stubborn about it because I didn't want us to be pigeonholed as a team building company. I started removing the word team building from our website, and then I learned that was stupid because that's what people were Googling.
Mm-hmm. That's their terminology, right?
Right. That's their language, and understanding their language and then getting to the root of it later and validating that that's what they feel their problem is in the moment and then helping them find the problem.
Right. Yeah. And we found that with sales innovation as well, that everybody's interested in sales innovation, but people don't necessarily know what it is.
Right.
Innovation is like, it's like cultural change. We talk about it a lot, but then when you say, okay, let's do it, it's like, well, what do we do?
Yeah.
And so what do they call innovation? Well, they call it problem solving. They call it consultative selling, strategic selling. In the background, what they're thinking of is, how do I become, a more innovative, more creative problem solver for our customers?
We're near the end of this podcast, believe it or not. Michelle has already revealed her animal. before I asked her. So we have to ask Mark, what kind of animal are you in business and why?
Probably, this will sound a little cliched, but probably a tiger.
Okay.
And the reason is, or it could be a cat maybe. The reason is I'm curious, and I'm always thinking about what's the next idea. I'm very goal-oriented. Maybe that's more tiger-like. Cats aren't that goal-oriented except to get naps. I'm not a big napper, but I'm very goal-oriented. And I can be aggressive when I have that goal and I'm trying to get to a goal. I tend to be very, very focused, working toward results. Yeah, so that's probably where my DNA pool is right now.
Awesome. A tiger and a
Jack Russell Terrier. I'm just fast enough to get away from him when he gets too aggressive. So there you go.
I don't have to be faster than the tiger. I just have to be faster than you.
That's right.
A chameleon's pretty fast, though.
That's true. That's when I turn into the chameleon.
Tiger may not be able to see the chameleon.
Exactly. You could just turn into the chameleon and run, and he'll never get you. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time today, having you both on the podcast. And if people want to learn more about you or connect with you, what are some good ways to do that?
Gosh, the easiest way is to go to SalesGlobe.com, and there are links to our articles and blogs and different podcasts and broadcasts and things of that nature. And then we're also on Twitter and on LinkedIn.
Great. And I'll share all that information in our show notes as well.
Okay.
Great.
And then in terms of our books, if you're interested in the innovative sale, that's on Amazon.com, as well as our book on sales compensation called What Your CEO Needs to Know About Sales Compensation, and our book on strategic account planning called Essential Account Planning.
Well, it sounds like we have to have a couple more podcasts.
We got lots to talk about.
Well, that's very possible. The podcast I recorded earlier is someone who's been on a podcast before, and we have such great conversations that now he comes back every now and then, has become a regular guest. So we'll have to bring you back as well.
Well, great. Thank you.
All right. Yes.
Okay, great. Well, we're going to wrap it up if you can hold on. So thanks again to both of you for being here today. And thank you to all of our listeners who have been listening. You can find show notes for this episode, including contact information for Michelle and Mark on our website at thepivotalleader.com. The Pivotal Leader is a production of Pivot 10 Results, a strategy and training company that helps businesses shift from people problems to performance results. Remember, you can find our podcast on iTunes, and if you're an iTunes subscriber, please leave us a rating and review. And don't forget to email me any questions that you might have related to this podcast at gina@pivot10.com. And until next time, if you're feeling stuck in your business, it's probably time to pivot.
You've been listening to The Pivotal Leader with Gina Trimarco, owner and founder of Pivot 10 Results and Carolina Improv Company. You can find show notes for this episode on our website at thepivotalleader.com. The Pivotal Leader is a production of Pivot 10 Results, a strategy and training company that helps businesses shift from people problems to performance results. If your company needs help pivoting to success, visit pivot10results.com or email Gina at gina@pivot10results.com. And until next time, if you're feeling stuck in your business, it's probably time to pivot.